Right, great. Thank you, Mayor. To my fellow colleagues, hello. I'm Councilmember Drew Glover, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about the idea of the implementation of a Beach Flats Impact Fund. So to provide a little bit of background with regards to the impetus behind this, in December or January, we were approached by representatives of the Beach Flats community neighborhood and organizations serving the Beach Flats community to address the impacts felt by the lowest income neighborhood in the city of Santa Cruz caused by the operation specifically of the boardwalk during summer months. So I'll first start by just kind of breaking down what is a benefit district, because it's essentially what we would be creating as a parking benefit district. We're referring to it as an impact fund because we want to acknowledge the impact that the Beach Flats experiences from the boardwalk. But a parking benefit district, or PBD, are defined geographic areas typically in downtowns or along commercial corridors in which any revenue generated from on-street and off-street parking facilities within the district is returned to the district to finance neighborhood improvements. There are successful examples of this that can be seen around the country. I distributed a document to my colleagues just a moment ago that focuses on the LA Metro example, which I'll refer to a little bit later, but it's a great tool to be used to generate additional revenue and to support impacted neighborhoods. So why implement an impact fund? Well, there are these three primary reasons of things that we can look towards, which is the ability to provide necessary improvements of social services and communities, fund the communities most impacted by some of the different commercial activity that's happening in a city, and implement and create community projects, all to address some of the issues. During the summer months specifically, in the neighborhood of the Beach Flats, it's inundated by attendees from the boardwalk who essentially overwhelm the area. This increased attendance results in increased exposure to CO2 emissions, noise, trash, traffic, and wear and tear on the 21-acre neighborhood, all of which negatively impact the quiet enjoyment and the use for the residents. Some examples are road and drainage degradation, inaccessibility to parking, and a feeling of essentially being trapped in your own neighborhood. Just to provide some context as to the Beach Flats and some of the stuff that they're dealing with down there, even with the cost of housing, is the survey that was done in 2016 by No Place Like Home, which looked at the rents of rate burden situations, overcrowding in housing, as well as forced evictions. And not only of the 435 renters that were surveyed along Beach Flats and Lower Ocean talking about being rent burdened, 73% experienced being rent burdened in the Beach Flats and Lower Ocean neighborhood, but people from the Latinx community reported back at about 80% of that population being rent burdened. Looking at the issues of forced eviction, especially for families with children, was about 46%, and Latinx families at 52%. So not only with regards to beautification topics, but we'll also be talking about other ways that the Impact Fund can be used to prevent homelessness and also support affordable housing development. So here, I just want to take a second to illustrate kind of the general proposed area of the map of the benefit district, of the benefit district itself. Now, this map doesn't extend all the way to the wharf, but the proposed streets can give you an idea of the volume of meters. You can kind of see them. I don't know if you can see them from here, but if you look behind you, the little yellow dots that represent the different meter locations. These would be included in the benefit district, but could include Beach Street, potentially from the wharf to the boardwalk, down past the boardwalk with this curve that you see here up onto 3rd Avenue, and then down Raymond, LeBrant, 2nd Avenue, and 1st Street, which continues over, if the image were to continue to the left, past that large parking lot over to essentially the boardwalk bowl. So how would it work? These are some preliminary estimates based off of some of the numbers that were given to us by staff of the overall parking revenue that is generated from that specific district, looking at the meters in question. Now, the way we got these numbers was, this is an underestimate, let me emphasize that, of the amount of revenue that can be generated to go into this impact fund, because the way that we calculated this was just taking the overall projected revenue for fiscal year 20, dividing it by 4 essentially to get the months of the year, which is June through September, and then looking at a 15% annual increase over the next 3 years to generate these numbers. Now, I say that this is an underestimate because we didn't calculate that there would be an influx of the parking during those months, which is where a substantial amount of that overall estimated revenue would be coming from. The reason why we have it structured this way is because the parking that's surrounding the boardwalk is regulated by the Coastal Commission. So the city is able to do small annual increases that do not exceed 25% annually or 50% over 3 years, which would then require an approval by the Coastal Commission. So if we were to look at, say, a proposed increase of 15% annually, then within the first year, based off of the projections for fiscal year 20, we would see $16,000 coming into the fund. The next year, in year 2, with 30%, would be $36,000 coming into the fund. And finally, in year 3 of the pilot phase, essentially, of the impact fund, it would generate approximately $60,000, $61,000 for that third year, for a total estimated revenue of $113,098, roughly, that could be allocated towards programs and projects in the Beach Flats community, without having to get approval from the parking, or the Coastal Commission. So what do the projects look like? So there are 3 primary areas outlined in the agenda report specifically that would be looked at, and this is after talking with representatives from organizations serving the Beach Flats community and the needs that are associated there from their observations and the work that they've been doing. And so the first is social support and service programs, housing development and protections, and then infrastructure and beautification projects of both the streets and of their parks. The Impact Fund is envisioned to support work geared towards creating affordable housing development, supporting social programs and services, which could include free legal clinics, supporting tenants' rights, after-school youth programming, counseling, community resource centers, services helping to reduce homelessness, supporting the Beach Flats Garden, increasing access to quality, healthy foods, and providing funding and for increased access to community resources such as healthcare for the Lower Ocean and Beach Flats neighborhood, but also infrastructure repairs like roads, parks beautifications, and drainage solutions, which have all been an issue in that surrounding community. The projects will be created for the community, and this is where I will turn you to the Metro document that I shared with you, because it gives a really great kind of breakdown of what LA has already done with some of these benefit districts or impact funds, which, and I quote from the piece, are used to make various improvements such as street sweeping, tree planting and trimming, sidewalk and street repairs, street lighting, graffiti removal, historic preservation, putting utility wires underground, and also, which is not mentioned specifically, but I think is something that is relevant to the Beach Flats and parking access, is to be able to offer parking permits to all neighbors in that area so that they can have security in their parking. The way that it could be structured, and this is something that we'll get to when we get to the recommendation, is developing the benefit district through the involvement of key stakeholders, businesses, developers, landowners, but especially the organizations and the community members serving and living in that community to help figure out what the process could be to develop the rules of the parking district, and also taking the initiative steps to work collaboratively, to create shared goals and objectives, to create an overall plan for the parking district. But then just as importantly is figuring out the way in which to develop the granting process of those funds to programs to ensure that they are serving that community directly and are not being siphoned out of that fund for outside projects and outside areas. So the idea with the agenda report specifically, as you can see with the recommendation, which I'll repeat in just a second, is to work, or direct staff essentially to work to create a proposal that would come back to council for review by April 2020, so that then we could have an in-depth kind of process engaging the community as well as different stakeholders to have those conversations and come back with a plan that council can review and then ideally approve. So the recommendation here is for a motion to direct staff to work with co-signing council members, community bridges, and other interested community partners to develop the policy framework, feasibility, and implementation plan to establish a Beach Flats Impact Fund through parking meter revenue, and return to council with analysis results and action plan no later than April 2020. It's really a conversation of equity and making sure that those that are impacted by the tourism that we experience in the community are having money essentially put back into their community, not only to help with mitigating climate change, to address the issue of CO2 emissions, but also to make sure that they're living and thriving in a community that's well served. So thank you.
Very much.